Welcome to the Unusual History of Everything, the podcast that uncovers the unusual history of everything around us. I'm Karen Lacey.
And I'm Melanie Dellis. On this episode, we look at the origins of some evil-eye superstitions and just how afraid we still are of bad luck and evil spirits.
Most people believe in some sort of superstition, whether it's throwing salt over your shoulder to keep the devil away, or preventing bad luck by not walking under a ladder or breaking a mirror. It may seem silly, but these superstitions have been around for thousands of years and are passed down from generation to generation, like grandma's keepsakes. Some believe superstitions are super silly, but there are logical origins behind each one.
No one wants bad luck, and if you think you just gave yourself some by spilling the salt, the quickest way to counter that bad luck is to throw some salt over your left shoulder. Why the left? Because that's where the devil sits, ready to dole out some bad mojo. Things like this are considered to be a type of conversion ritual, an action people perform to undo bad luck they just created for themselves. A turn-of-the-century anthropologist named Bronislaw Malinowski believed these actions were created by the anxiety of uncertainty, which leads people to use magic in order to feel like they have some sense of control. He named it the anxiety ritual theory.
I'm curious about the devil on your left shoulder because it just hit me. Most people in the world are right-handed. So therefore, you want the angel on your right side because that's the one that, handling, writing, and doing whatever you're doing. Is that why everyone is so against people being left-handed when they're little kids, like back in the 50s and stuff, where they were trying to force lefties to become righties?
Maybe. I'm on the Merriam-Webster website. And I Googled it to see what was up. And it says that sinister, the word sinister, which of course means like evil or malevolent in some way, it comes from a Latin word that means on the left side.
What?
Left being associated with evil likely comes from a majority of the population being right-handed.
See? Oh
Biblical texts describing God saving those on the right on Judgment Day and images depicting Eve on Adam's left. Ooh, like Eve is consorting with the devil, which she kind of did. Consequently, the Latin for right, which is dexter, finds its way into positive words like dexterous, and the French word for right, droit, is found in adroit. I don't know what that has to do with what we're talking about, but...
Well, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Both my mom and my husband are lefties, so therefore they're evil. I'm just kidding.
It says sinister. I already said this kind of, but I'm going to add a little bit more. Sinister comes from a Latin word meaning on the left side, and while the earliest uses of the word in English date from the 14th century, they pertain to some measure of evil, foreboding, or malevolence. Interesting. Okay, here. Why was the left considered evil, Karen?
Yeah, why?
Just because they attribute it to the dominance of right-handed people in the population and awkwardness of motions made from the left side of the body. It says that such darkness wasn't always attached to that side, however. The ancient Celts, for example, worshipped the left side, associating it with femininity and the fertile womb. But beginning with the appearance of Eve on Adam's left side in accounts of Genesis, the Christian tradition finds instances of the left side being pinned to immorality. In the 20th century, anthropologists and psychologists identified left-handedness as a biological anomaly, one associated with deviancy, but that could be corrected away with behavioral reinforcement.
Oh, that's fascinating. Because I know my mom kind of went through where they were trying to push her to be a righty in school. And thankfully, she didn't have parents that really pushed that on her. My husband, same thing. He's a lefty, and he didn't really get pushed too much, but he kept getting put, and he still is. He's always put in situations where it's just you need to be using your right hand. So because of that, he has to kind of figure ways around that in terms of where he sits at the table or how he holds his fork or whatever. Fascinating.
It is fascinating.
Well, whatever you call it, and whatever we're talking about in terms of superstitions, let's get back to that.
Yeah.
So, whatever we do to banish bad luck and escape from evil, superstitions are here to stay. So take knocking on wood, for example.
I do that all the time.
I do too, actually. And sometimes I'll even be like, if I can't find real wood, I'm like, knock on fake wood.
Yeah, knock on fake wood. And you have to say it's fake wood. Just
you do. Yeah, you have to say, I understand, but I still need some wood here to knock on, right? Well, this is based on one of the oldest fears that humans have. If we talk about something good happening, then something bad will happen instead. It's like that idea of like putting it out there into the universe could like change it. So unless we knock on wood, right?
Right.
So how will our good fortune be cursed? Apparently, evil spirits, demons, and jealous neighbors lie in wait to hear about our successes so that they can destroy them.
That's totally true. Although I don't understand why it doesn't work all the time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Maybe it's the types of wood we're using.
Interesting that you say that.
I know. Good segue, right? Good segue.
There are many theories as to how this superstition originated, and none are verified. But we're going to give you a few of the most logical ones now, or what we think might be the most logical ones. Saying this stems from a pagan belief isn't too far-fetched. The Celts, for example, believed that spirits and gods lived inside the trees, and perhaps knocking on the trunks was a way to call on their protection. These ancient cultures thought the oak, ash, hazel, hawthorn, and willow trees were sacred and had protective powers, so it is possible. When Christianity came along, it linked the practice of knocking on wood to the wood of the cross from Christ's crucifixion. Christian reformers in Europe thought that converting the pagans would be easier if they blended some of their customs, and knocking on wood was one of them.
Mm-hmm. And another theory comes from the Oxford English Dictionary and from British folklorist Steve Roud in his book, The Lore of the Playground. Both sources say knocking on wood comes from the 19th century child's game called Tiki Touchwood. The game is basically like tag, but if you touch a piece of wood, you're safe from the person who's chasing you. Considering knocking on wood goes back to the beginnings of Christianity, if not before, this theory probably isn't right. It's more likely that the game came from an already established belief in knocking on wood for protection.
Yeah. Protecting ourselves from the evil eye is something that I do every day by wearing a necklace shaped like an eye or hanging blue glass eye amulets in my home and car. The Greeks call it the mati, and it is meant to repel the evil eye from you and your home. The Italians have the horn, and several other cultures have their own significant amulets, and it's all because we don't want someone to look at us with jealousy or hate and wish harm upon us. Glass beads, by the way, first appeared in the Mediterranean around 1500 BC, and evil eye beads became popular with the Phoenicians, Assyrians, Greeks, Romans, and Ottomans around that time. Some historians believe that since most people in those areas had brown eyes, those with blue eyes were most likely to give the evil eye, and therefore the glass amulets were colored blue.
From ancient times, people all over the world have believed that certain people can cause misfortune with just a look. In, quote, The Evil Eye, The Origins and Practices of Superstitions, end quote, written in 1895, Frederick Elworthy said, quote, It is firmly believed by all ancients that some malignant influence darted from the eyes of envious or angry persons and so infected the air as to penetrate and corrupt the bodies of both living creatures and inanimate objects, end quote. It was therefore very important to have rituals and amulets that could ward off this evil.
You know what? That, I believe, is really true, because I don't know if you've ever walked into a room and, you know, you can feel the tension in the air.
Oh,
or
totally.
You can just feel that something's not right, or maybe somebody was just fighting and then you walk in and you can just feel like the energy in the air is just thick with tension, thick with something that's maybe not so positive. Or opposite, you can feel when like a room is full of happiness, like you can actually feel this. I believe that people can give off like these really powerful energies because we are bodies of energy, basically. That's what we are made of.
Well, totally. And like if someone's in a positive mood, it rubs off on you. Someone's in a negative mood, it rubs off on you.
Yeah.
And they always have that like pay it forward. So like if you're doing something like going to a restaurant and you leave a good tip, or you tell a server, you know, someone just yelled at them, you're like, you know what, you're doing a great job. It goes so much further.
Right. It's all
than
about
that negative thing. You kind of end the cycle.
I feel like people give off these really negative or positive energies, maybe not consciously, you know, and if that's possible, then yeah, like if I'm looking at you and I'm like, oh my God, I can't stand that, you know what? And like I'm giving off these like negative energies coming out of my eyes and glaring at you or whatever it is. Like I believe that negativity could really come out of me and like go toward you because I'm looking at you or I'm feeling it all about you. You know what I mean? Like we could probably direct it somehow.
If nothing else, and that person sees you looking at them that way, it's going to make them uncomfortable and make them not as positive positive. So it messes with their
and maybe they
positivity.
Trip. They trip and fall because they just saw you glaring at them in a mean way. And then they get uncomfortable and they're unnerved. And totally. We can affect people's behaviors based on our level of negative or positivity.
Yeah. I mean, I would argue, though, if someone hides that negativity and you have absolutely no idea that they hate your face, then maybe, like, it doesn't change them. It's kind of like, it's almost like a known thing. Like, I know this person doesn't like me. I know that they're giving me some look.
Right. Well,
therefore, it affects you.
That's why we need those amulets of protection, because we don't always know or feel when people are throwing negativity our way, right? So that's why ancient people always created these amulets of protection or wore certain things, or you know what I mean, so that they can protect themselves when they're unknown. When they're not realizing that people are doing these things to them. Yeah,
it's kind of interesting. Like, this is one of those superstitions, you know, with the evil eye and everything like that. It kind of makes sense. Mm-hmm. At least to me. Like, you're right. Like, what you're saying. It makes sense. Like, I get it. I'm like, okay, yeah, I could totally do that.
But if you actually see someone giving you the evil eye, there are some things that you can do to stop it dead in its tracks. The most powerful one is spitting.
Can you spit on the person or just spit in general?
Well, okay, so
because I saw that one, I'm like, that's just going to make it worse.
Right. Now, I wouldn't spit on the person, although
they might deserve it.
They might deserve it, and it might make you feel really good, but it could cause more problems. Mm-hmm. But what you're really supposed to do here is, like, say you're a few feet away from each other or whatever, and you see them giving you the evil eye, you spit right directly, like in line for them, like in the path that leads to them. You spit on that path. You know what I mean? So, like, Karen and I are facing each other right now with, 8 feet between us or something like that. And I would spit, like, in the middle toward you, but not on you, to kind of stop that evil eye. It's like a spit barrier, a spit wall. Your evil eye nonsense cannot cross my spit wall. Okay. But you can also just cross your fingers. I don't know, like, what that... I guess, like, when you cross your fingers, if you're telling a lie, then you don't get bad luck from it. Remember?
Yeah.
That whole thing where they're like, little kids have their hand behind their back, crossing their fingers as they tell a lie. I used to do that all the time. I just remembered that. You could probably do both, though. You could spit and cross your fingers. That's what I would do, is just in case.
Yeah, just in case. Cover all your bases.
Although, you know what? A Greek tradition, and I think some other cultures have this tradition as well, like when a bride is walking down the aisle, as she passes you, you spit 3 times on her train or on her dress so that it'll keep the devil away. You do everything in 3 times because of the Trinity, and it keeps the devil away. So spitting.
I've heard of that. Yeah, I've heard of that. So I always thought, depending on what you're, like, reading or watching, it seems like their spitting can be a good thing to protect somebody, and spitting can also be, like you saying, like, cut off that evil eye kind of stare, give you a spit wall.
That darn devil. Always trying to keep him away. Well, it's also important to carry something with you all the time to keep the evil eye away. Keeping something made of iron in your pocket is good, or wear a red thread or blue bead or an amulet in the shape of an eye or an open hand. But there are other things you can find in nature to ward off evil.
That's right. Have you ever heard of hagstones?
You know, I have not heard of, I've seen them, but I didn't know they were called hagstones. Sometimes called holy stones.
Yeah. Well, these are some small stones that have a hole through them. People used to believe that these stones could protect them against all kinds of bad things. And they're not stones that you find all the time. So it makes sense that if you find one, it would be considered good luck, like a 4-leaf clover, right?
Yeah.
People would use them as, like, a key ring to protect against break-ins, to stop any evil spirits from entering a person's home through a keyhole. And let's not forget those darn witches.
They're always causing problems.
Apparently, it was a fear for some to be invaded by witches, so people hung hagstones on the door to keep them out.
I know. I
feel so bad for witches. There's so many. And we said this in the last couple of podcasts. I'm like, there's so many things where people are like, oh, keep witches away. And I'm like,
even in the beer podcast, we talked about witches.
It's like, you know what? Yeah. They're people too.
Really? I mean, and I think that's why they named them hagstones, because they called witches hags, and holy stones because they had the hole through them, right? But remember in Spiderwick Chronicles, the movie, they had a hagstone and you looked through it with one eye, and that was the only way you could see the fairy world.
Very cool.
I don't know if that works or not, because I haven't found one since I was a little kid, but if I ever do find one or you find one, let's look through it and see if we can see goblins and stuff.
And fairies.
And fairies. I mean, it's interesting that people would attach keys to the hagstones. Keys were usually made of iron, and iron has always been considered a good thing to carry to keep away evil. But have you ever thought about why? Let's assume evil spirits and maybe even demons are like ghosts, and they need electromagnetic energy to manifest and do bad things to us. It's possible then that an electrical conductor like iron could be used to drain or ground out the energy from the evil spirit or demon by simply touching it. Maybe that's why cemeteries use iron fences, to keep spirits in. And it explains why iron horseshoes are placed above the front doors.
Oh, how fascinating.
Yeah.
I didn't think about it like that.
Yeah, I didn't either before. It drains the energy, iron drains the energy from the evil spirits and makes them go away. It's like in Ghostbusters when they have the trap open and it's sucking the ghost into the trap. It's like that. It contains it. Interesting.
I like that. Well, last one we'll talk about is one of my traditions, and that's not to split the pole. And to the best of my knowledge, no one else in my family practices this superstition. And to be honest, I'm not exactly sure where I even first heard of it. I would say that maybe I made it up because I have been known to make up random rules or superstitions in my head. Just ask my husband. But after
and sometimes random words.
And random words. It's totally true. I do that. But after doing a little digging, others do this as well, and it might have a connection to perhaps growing up in the southern states. As some of you may know, I grew up in Texas, and a lot of research out there that I was able to find suggests that the origins of splitting the pole might be from African American culture and creating ways of protecting oneself and their loved ones. To be honest, though, I could not really find a lot of information. But I did find a couple of accounts out there, and one of them was on the USC Digital Folklore Archives. Quote, splitting a pole means if two people are walking by a pole, they are not supposed to walk by opposite sides of the pole. So each person should walk on one side of the pole. If they were to separate and walk on opposite sides, they would have to say bread and butter in order to rid themselves of bad luck, end quote. So this would account for a telephone pole or a parking meter, whatever it might be.
Or even a fire hydrant.
Even a fire hydrant.
Or one of those stanchions or a pole like you see at the gas station. So I don't know.
Yes.
I have done this to trees.
Yes.
I have done this to parking meters. Anything that's coming up from the ground.
Any kind of obstacle.
Yeah. I always say bread and butter.
See, and I've never heard of the bread and butter until I mentioned this to you, and you were like, bread and butter. I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Well, I didn't know it was called splitting the pole, so that's interesting.
I didn't either.
Well, what did you do? If you didn't say bread and butter, what'd you do?
Well, okay, so I actually made up my own remedy because...
Of course you did.
Because, why not? I do that all the time. So... mine was to either undo the split pole. So if I'm noticing that a pole is about to be split or being split or has been split, I just basically retrace my steps.
And make the other person retrace their steps at the same time?
Just me.
Okay.
So that we're now on the same side of the pole. Because if we both do it, it would flip it, right? Mm-hmm. So the other thing that I would do is I would then split another pole. And it has to be something light. So it has to be if we split a fire hydrant, we have to do another fire hydrant, something like that.
Okay.
So that we kind of cancel out the original splitting. Now, I have to say, though, I've only ever told 2 people about this until now. So it's always been in my head that I'm even following the superstition. So most people don't even know that, I'm even doing it. Well, my husband definitely knows, though, because I'm like, Michael. And he's like, I split the pole. And so then he'll come back around or I'll come back around. And anyway.
Well, now you know that you, we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, where that comes from. It's an anxiety ritual, right? Mm-hmm. It's the...
which makes sense because I get really
conversion
anxious
ritual.
If it's happened.
Yes, so that you can have some sort of sense of control over that anxiety of the uncertain outcome of you splitting the pole and not saying bread and butter, which you didn't know about. So
I don't want it to
really
break this connection with a person, but I have to say though, I'll be in a big group, and if people are splitting the pole, then I have to make sure I'm at least on the side of someone that I really like, and then I'll give up my lesser connections or something.
Oh my god,
I know. I
make
totally rules. Well, anyway, that's the end of our episode. You can follow the Unusual History of Everything podcast on Instagram at The Unusual History of Everything, and on Facebook at The Unusual History of Everything podcast. And find our show notes on www.musecuratorial.com. The Unusual History of Everything is written, produced, and directed by Melanie Dellis and Karen Lacey.
New episodes air every Tuesday on all podcast outlets. Be sure to subscribe to us so you never miss an episode, and leave us a review. You can also see photos from our episodes and more on our website, Instagram, and Facebook. Thanks for listening. I'm Melanie Dellis.
And I'm Karen Lacey, your host for The Unusual History of Everything.
Da, da, da.